Hello, fellow trekkers and science fiction fans. Today I'm presenting a rather different and unique Star Trek phaser replica. What makes this replica so unique is the fact that, as far as I know, this phaser never existed in physical form. This design was never used in any Star Trek episode and exists only as schematic drawings in Franz Starfleet Technical Manual. Since there never was any TV prop to replicate, it might be more accurate to refer to my build of this phaser simply as a full-scale model. The technical manual illustrations clearly show that this early design was a possible foundation for the phaser designs that were brought to life by the TOS prop makers. This is my model of the Franz or Technical Manual Type 2 phaser. In this video, I'm going to compare it to replicas of the standard phaser props used in TOS. I built this from a kit many years ago. The Phaser 1 and Phaser 2 bodies are cast resin with metal parts that came with the kit. As you'll see, this design is very similar to the on-screen props, but also has some significant differences. To begin the comparison process, here's an overall view of the technical manual phaser side by side with a Roddenberry or Richard Coyle TOS Type 2 phaser replica. It's clear that the overall size and contours of the technical manual phaser are different than the on-screen props. In this view, you can also see that there are many details shared by both the replicas. I'm going to use a number of still photos to illustrate the differences between these two versions of the phaser too. The first thing you may notice is that the shape of the technical manual phaser is rather different than the props used on the TV show. Notice how the bottom of the technical manual phaser is a straight line from front to back, while the standard phaser 2 we've come to know has that lowered or extended area at the center that holds the trigger and mounts the pistol grip. The rear of the technical manual phaser is also wider than the standard phaser body and has rounded contours where the standard phaser has straight edges. In this shot, you can also see that the shape of the grips are quite different. The technical manual grip is a bit longer and wider than the standard phaser prop grip. Its bottom has rounded corners front and back, while the standard grip is flat and squared off along the bottom. Another thing you may have observed in the last photo is that the tech manual design is somewhat larger than the Roddenberry replica. By the way, I'm using the Roddenberry phaser here because, in my opinion, it's the most accurate replica of the TV phaser props available. This photo should give you a better idea of the difference in size between these two versions of the phaser. It's obvious the technical manual version is a bit longer and taller. Now I'll start comparing individual features of the two versions of the phaser. Beginning at the front, I'll contrast the beam emitter housing units. The technical manual phaser kit came with the machined aluminum beam emitter housing you see here. This is essentially a mid-grade component with no moving parts. This style emitter housing did carry over to a screen-used prop. It's the flashlight design that was actually used only once during TOS Season 1. The design was dropped from the show because it looked too much like a modern-day flashlight. I suppose the people working on the Season 1 episode thought the viewers wouldn't think the prop looked futuristic enough if it resembled their day-to-day flashlights. Compare this emitter unit to the style used on the TV props, which had a simple flat front. Look closely and you'll see that the beam emitter with control collar is also shaped differently on the TV props. Instead of the straight ribs, it has alternating smooth and ribbed sections, with the smooth areas recessed to provide a better grip on the part. The Roddenberry replica has an emitter with a rotating collar, as may have been used on some of the hero-grade TOS props. The next detail to examine is the Phaser 1 locking plate. The center image on the technical manual illustration clearly shows the front locking plate. The technical manual model kit came with a shiny metal part for the locking plate that matches the size and shape in the technical manual illustration. This part of the phaser differs from the on-screen props in that it is completely flat and does not wrap down over the front of the phaser. The on-screen props had a lock plate that came over the front and down just over the top of the electronic sight window. It's a minor distinction, but it's still a difference worth noting. While you're looking at the front of the phaser, note that the Tech Manual version does not have an electronic sight window. The space where the window should be is occupied by a shallow rectangular recess. The Technical Manual illustration does not even mention a sight window. Even TOS Season 1 phaser props, like the replica on the left, include a sight window, as did the phasers used in Season 2 and 3. Apparently, this was a design feature added when the Season 1 props were created. Moving on, we come to the side dial. I've never known what function this dial is supposed to control on a phaser, but the feature has appeared on phasers from all three TOS seasons. Season 1 phasers had a simpler side dial like the one on the technical manual model. I just want to point out that the side dial on the technical manual phaser is in the same location as on the screen used props and is about the same size and general shape. However, the precise shape and construction of this part did change over time. What's really interesting about this part is the fact that its function changed. The technical manual illustration labels this part as a dilithium crystal cell. Now this is just a guess, but I think the dilithium cell was dropped from the design when the prop makers decided to put the Phaser 2's power source into the pistol grip. The idea was to have interchangeable grips that could be used like replacing the magazine in an automatic pistol. When you ran out of bullets, you just replaced the grip. This new concept would have rendered the dilithium crystal power supply unnecessary, or at least redundant. My pro-built Roddenberry Phaser 2 has the side dial feature, and the dial can be rotated to any position you like. It's interesting to note that the Wand brand phaser replica went back to the technical manual design and incorporated a dilithium crystal chamber, complete with a clear plastic chunk of dilithium. Just to make the feature even more fun, the dilithium glows when you press the phaser's trigger. This, of course, isn't accurate to the on-screen props, but it is amusing. Moving back along the bottom of the phaser, we come to the trigger. On the technical manual version, there are actually two square trigger buttons. It seems one was the actual trigger, while the other was a safety or trigger lock. This arrangement presents two dissimilarities from the on-screen props. First, this feature was not used on any TOS phaser props, and I don't remember any TOS character ever referring to a safety switch on their phasers. All on-screen props used a single, straight, round rod as the P1's trigger. The second thing different about the technical manual's trigger arrangement is its location. The twin trigger buttons are set into the top of the pistol grip. On-screen props had their triggers extend down from the phaser's body. This made sense considering that the grips were supposed to be removable. As this photo shows, the grip on the technical manual phaser was attached to the body with screws. It obviously wasn't intended for a quick change and was probably meant to be removed only for maintenance purposes. By the way, if you want to confirm the removable grip concept, watch the TOS episode The Omega Glory. Captain Kirk has a whole conversation involving the interchangeable feature of phaser power packs. While I'm talking about the phaser's pistol grip, I want to point out one more minor difference between the technical manual phaser and the on-screen props. The grips on the TOS phaser props were not only supposed to be removable power packs, They were also supposed to be rechargeable. The bottom of the pistol grip in the technical manual design is flat, smooth, and totally featureless. It doesn't contain any detailing to represent the recharge port seen in many Phaser II replicas. The next detail to compare is the Phaser II power setting control knob. The control knob on the technical manual model is in the same position as it appears on all my other Phaser II replicas. It's also about the same size and shape, so there really isn't any difference to talk about here. The last detail of the Phaser II we need to look at are the heat dissipation fins, or radiators as they're sometimes called, located at the back of the body. This feature was considerably different on the TV show's props than it was on the technical manual design. For one thing, the size and shape of the fins changed. More importantly, their function changed. The technical manual identifies this part of the phaser body as deflector shields. I don't know what they were supposed to deflect, but it certainly doesn't sound like they were meant to draw off heat from the phaser's circuitry. The deflector shields on my model are a mid-grade style, being molded right onto the Phaser II body and simply painted silver. This heat dissipator representation was used on some TV props, but only on mid-grade and stunt-grade versions of those props. That about covers the details of the Type 2 phaser. It's time to move on and take a quick look at the Phaser 1 unit imagined by the technical manual design. The technical manual Phaser 1 has the same main features as the on-screen props did, with one exception. There is an electron aspirator, a power selection thumb wheel, and a power indicator dome. Notice that this clear part is a little longer and a little lower than on the TV props. However, the big difference here is that the Phaser 1 trigger is also on top of the phaser, right behind the aspirator pile. The trigger on the TV props was a small, round, metal stud on the underside of the P1. We got a brief but clear look at the TV props trigger in the Assignment Earth episode. This is just a guess, but I think it's safe to assume that the P1 trigger was moved to the bottom of this phaser when the design was reworked to include a pop-up electronic sight window. Since this new feature took over the position of the top side trigger bar, it made sense to move the trigger to the bottom where it wouldn't be obstructed by the thumb wheel or the power indicator dome. The Phaser 1 on my technical manual model is completely static. It has no moving parts or working light and sound effects. The phaser is solid resin, cast as a top half and a bottom half. The deflector strips along the sides are a single flat metal plate sandwiched between the upper and lower resin castings. As you can see, the front of the Phaser 1 is simply flat. There's no beam emitter detailing at all. The thumb wheel is also just cast resin painted silver. The power indicator dome is also cast resin with a paper readout strip underneath it. The kit I built this phaser from did not provide an electron aspirator or a trigger stud. I used a simple waffle pattern piece of peel and stick metallizer tape to create the aspirator pile on my Phaser 1. I cut the trigger from a thick piece of black styrene plastic, sanded it into shape, and simply glued it in place. Well, that's about all there is to say about the Phaser 1 on my technical manual model. Just to be thorough, I'll give you a quick look at the electronics bay before I demonstrate how this phaser works. I installed all the electronic components for the phaser's light and sound system in the hollow area of the Phaser 2 body. In this photo you can see the main parts of the sound system. The only other parts are the trigger switches in the pistol grip and the blue LED inserted into the back of the beam emitter housing. The soundboard produces two slightly different phaser sounds, and the trigger buttons control which sound is heard along with the phaser beam lighting effect. Now, here's a brief demonstration of how this model works. I took advantage of the twin trigger button arrangement to control the sound effects when the phaser is fired. Each trigger button activates a slightly different phaser sound. Well, that's my video on the Franz Joseph phaser. I hope you enjoyed it. Visit sci-fi-dragon.net to read the article on this model and other science fiction subjects, as well as military model subjects, and some model building how-to hints and tips. Thanks for watching. So long for now.